So my name is Frederick Tobun, and this session is Kingdom Without Walls, and we're talking about submission versus suppression. We're going to, I think one of the key things we're going to be reflecting on the difference between submission and suppression, and how it plays out in family, community, professional and public life. The way that the session will work is I'm going to go through some slides with you, and then we're going to do a little bit of workshop as well. Okay, so we'll be in groups having a discussion. So it's not always going to be me speaking in this direction. If you have a point or you want to raise a point, you can. Just lift up your hand, it's okay. It's a collaborative session in that regard. Alright, everyone cool with that?
How will we know roughly what slide we're on?
I've just started.
Are you gonna thumb
I'm
out?
gonna give a cue. I'll give a cue, don't worry. So, first things first, why tackle this subject? That's the second slide. Alright, I'll always say this. So why tackle this subject? Why was it important to discuss this? Because when Esther said what we're going to do for the next Kingdom Without Walls, and it crossed my mind, I thought, you know what, let's do that. We've talked about the difference between submission and suppression in the past. Okay? For me, in all my years of counselling people, the most common issue that I discuss is how they relate to authority. It usually comes up. Alright? And that's simply because whether you have had authority figures in your life or not, them being there or being absent, it has a huge impact on you. And it affects the type of person you become. And it affects the type of person you become for other people. And so for me, it's like, well, actually, it's probably worth having this conversation and talking about it. Second thing as well is that from my experience, I've also found that people struggle to identify within a relationship in a relationship with an authority, they've struggled to identify when it's moved from submission to suppression. Now, when we're talking about that relationship with authority, that could be any kind of authority. But you tend to find that, people are generally on their guards, but it's often within familiar relationships that they struggle. Can anybody identify with that? Yeah? And it could be at home, in your family, it could be at work, it could be with friends, that suddenly something's not quite right in the relationship and it's moved from submission to suppression and you don't realise that. But you just know that something's not working for you. And so that's some of the things that I want to really go through and discuss today. The first thing is, what is submission? I think we're just going to look at what the dictionary says. And it says the word submission means the action of accepting or yielding to a superior force or to the will of an authority of another person. I'll say that again. It's the action or accepting or yielding to a superior force or to the will or authority of another person. In most cases in our lives, nobody comes into the room and says, you're going to submit to me. Yeah? In other words, it's progressive. Okay? Whether it's with family, like I said, or colleagues at work, it's that ongoing connection with that individual that you gradually give yourself over to their authority. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah? And whether that's legitimate or illegitimate, what we're going to find is it's a line that goes gradual. It's not clear, okay, in our lives. If we look at suppression is the action of suppressing something, such as a person, activity, or publication. I've put person there because in the second line on that slide it says the heavy-handed suppression of political dissent. Now, whether you realise it or not, your life is a political life. Because your life is all about decision-making, and politics is about decision-making. So when you read political dissent there, it's not just about a person standing up against the government, rather it's about your life being one where you're constantly negotiating with people around you, all right? And it's that negotiation about whose will is going to be done. Does that make sense? Now, we can never avoid that. You've obeyed people just getting here and you don't know the people you've obeyed, but they've put laws in place and you've had to obey them. Does anybody drive here? Mm-hmm. Right, so you've driven on what? The left or the right-hand side of the road? Yeah? You've obeyed the traffic lights, yeah? If you've come on London Transport, you've obeyed the fact that you've got your Oyster card and you've got to wander over, yeah? Or you've paid for a ticket. In other words, somebody has determined an outcome and you've obeyed it without even arguing. Right? In other words, there is a position we're in where we are automatically submitting to things, and that means we don't even know when it moves from submission to suppression. Because decisions that are being made are above us. Does that make sense? Okay. So in this case, submission and suppression are challenging because it's all about the negotiation of the will. Alright? So at work, you're negotiating about the will. Whose will? We don't know until it clashes and you definitely know it's not your will. Has anyone been in that situation? You want to do something a certain way, and it's when they say no, then you realise that there's a clash.
Yeah.
But actually, before that, you've been doing things people's way, because when you got introduced into your job, you went through an induction, you went through all the process, and you were happily submitting until suddenly maybe they asked you to do something you didn't want to do. So this is why it's grey, isn't it? Yeah, it's a grey area for us.
Frederick,
Yeah, go ahead.
sometimes you can see when it becomes submission. Like, for example, when the Oyster card first came out,
Right.
we know that it was a case that you had the option of using cards, and it was I think it was okay, but the way they did it, they forced you to use Oyster cards because they made it a lot more cheaper than the paper card tickets, and as a result, you were forced to use Oyster, and knowing full well that they were going to record your information. So some cases it becomes very clear.
But that might be to you. You see, there's for example, I've just Pete's, when is it? Is it Monday your birthday?
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, Pete's birthday, so Pete's birthday on Monday. And I got Pete a book for his birthday. I sent it to him on Amazon, but it's called Nudge. All right, and it's a policy used by government to nudge people along to behaviours that they deem right. And what you're given as an example there is nudge in operation. It's where they put positive things there so that you feel that, oh yeah, I want to do that, and then what they do is they gradually remove the things prior to that actually you would have possibly said, I'm not doing that because I hold on to this old way of doing things. Yeah, but you're right, you're absolutely right. Some people can see it, but some people can't see it. But it does go on. Yeah?
That's what I was saying, I didn't actually notice that.
Yeah.
I noticed the contactless. I felt like I was forced to use the contactless.
Yeah.
I now use it just because it's easier than putting money on the Oyster. I don't use it often. But I didn't notice that because I was young when it happened. So I was like, oh, Oyster, we were free for so many years. So it was naturally, so that was a really good point. But I didn't notice the suppression because it's true, we weren't given the choice, you just had to have an Oyster.
Another good example, which may be a little bit sort of showing my age, is the council tax. So I was still a teenager when the council tax sort of came in, but it caused huge aggro across the country because it was called the stealth tax. It was the idea, basically, another way of the government getting money from you, but the reasons were valid in terms of they were for the borough. So that's why we pay council tax. Now, the argument initially when the council tax came in is they wouldn't go up too high. Well, look after X amount of years. Year on year, what happens? Council tax goes up. and the government and the council argue, well, government's not giving us enough money, so we have to, what? We have to still pay for those services, so it has to go down to you and I who have to pay for it. And that's why we've seen the cost of living go up in London as an example. But again, you see, that's another thing is, what will it take for people to say, wait a minute, this has moved from me just submitting to something on a day-to-day basis, that's to do with moving the society along, to something that, oh, this seems suppressive, and actually is forcing us to do something. And people argued that. People said there was no law for me to pay the council tax. In America, there's many examples, and over here, I can't think of a specific one right now, but there are times when a council will employ a policy, and you think it's law, and you'll submit to it. And it's actually not, it's just a policy, you don't have to submit to it. And there are many examples, I just can't think of one.
So at work in the hospital, you're meant to park without permit. But basically, people know, well, not everyone knows, but some people know if you park and they give you a ticket, they can't enforce it. If you just ignore it, if you ignore it, because they're not the parking on the street, it's actually, I think it's not saying illegal, but technically, they don't need to be doing that. But because you see it, you know, oh my God, I've got to pay the fine. If you just ignore it, they can't do nothing. It's not like they can tow your car away. So that the policy, where did this policy come from? Why are we paying to park? Or why are we getting a fine for parking at work? You know, so that's why.
That's what happens. So, the key thing to look at is where does submission, these characteristics of submission and suppression, where do they manifest? Well, they basically, these qualities manifest in a hierarchical relationship, okay? And it's a hierarchical relationship is a structured relationship where one person or persons has authority over another. Okay, so you're always going to see in that context. It's basically where there's some sort of rank involved. Okay? And I think that's important because we're not here to discuss or to throw away the idea of what rank is and hierarchy is, because I'm going to talk about that, why it's important. But it actually does, suppression and submission arise from the issues going on in rank, the issues going on in that sort of hierarchical structure. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. And there's not one of us that isn't in a hierarchical structure, whether it's in the family, whether it's in the community, whether it's at work, and it's broader. Now, the key thing as well is saying, well, looking at submission and suppression, before we get into the details of it, which do we experience the most? When you go out to work, or when you wake up in the morning, and before you leave your house, or maybe when you head off to work, do you experience it? Is submission and suppression something you're experiencing every day? And then which one are you experiencing more of in society? And the way we do that is, or the way I'm looking at it, is a concept called PESTLE. It's a business concept, but it works really well in a lot of other areas. And that is looking at it from a political standpoint, from an economical standpoint, from a social standpoint, from a technological standpoint, from a legal, and then from an environmental. So when you want to look at society and see what's going on, and whether that's something that you experience, that's one way that you can begin to look at it. Okay? So, the first thing we're going to look at is from the political perspective, and you'll see it on your slides. Do you know who that gentleman is? Sorry? You might have to speak up a little bit, because the little one's telling us before us. He's got the answer. Sorry, who is it? David Cameron, all right? And the key thing there is Cameron exits before Brexit. So what's that about? What's that about? Cameron exits before Brexit. What did he do?
He just lost
He did the
the referendum.
Sorry? He left the ship, exactly. He called a referendum. The referendum didn't go his way, or the way he anticipated, and he left, yeah? And what he said was, his reasoning was that as a Remainer, it would not be right for him to lead the Brexit. So what do you think about that? Thinking about the ideas of submission and suppression, what do you think about him deciding that, well, I've led this, the people have voted, but I'm no longer going to stay in the position of power? Any ideas?
It sounds like he was refusing to be suppressed because it's not a decision or a choice that he would have wanted to make or wanted to go on with him, that it was his domain to lead over it.
True. I mean, I actually think in that case, I think he should have submitted and led the way. But he decided, no, I'm not going to come under that pressure, suppression, so I'm going to skip out. Do you think that's had an impact on us?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry?
I think because he didn't want to submit, that's what it shows actually. He didn't want to submit to what was going on, and instead of him doing the right thing and saying, okay, it may not have gone the way I wanted it to, but I'm still going to follow this through, he showed, I'm going to take the exit route.
Yeah.
And if I don't get my way, then that's it.
Yeah.
I'm going to walk away.
I'm going to walk away. And that, by the way, in the history of this country, and as the Prime Minister of this country, that's significant. Somebody of his authority and standing to make that decision, in that case where he should have submitted to the will of the people, remember it's a democracy, and his job is as a member of Parliament, and as a minister, especially as a Prime Minister, his job is to, or first, the word Prime Minister is First Minister, his job is to serve the people. The people wanted to leave, so his job was to serve them their Brexit. So in this case, he chose that he didn't want to be suppressed, sorry, he didn't want to submit, and he didn't want to be suppressed, so he's out. He's out. Next one. Theresa wobbles through Brexit. So we've got one who exits from Brexit, we've got another one who wobbles through Brexit. What do we mean by that? This is in our leadership, our political leadership. What do you think I mean by that?
Lack of confidence.
Possibly. I mean, I think what I put here.
I don't know. I was just going to say that she suppressed herself. She's trying to submit to the process, but being suppressed by the political sphere and by the people as well.
Yeah.
And she was actually a Remainer.
Yeah, she was a Remainer, and that's important. I put here that the nation isn't quite sure who's in control, whether it's our government or whether it's the EU. there is a constant question mark on Theresa May on her ability, all right, to see through this Brexit in a manner and get us an outcome that we will be satisfied with. Especially since she has lost certain members of parliament from the office that she's provided them regarding Brexit. It's like she's taken control, but not wanting to relinquish that control to the right people, and as a result, it seems like she's making a mess of things at the moment. So it feels like her walk on stage, which is that picture, actually demonstrates her walk through this whole process. You're not sure, she's not very stable in the process. The next one, this one for me is the most recent and most frightening. MPs declare independence from Brexit. Yeah? Now, is everybody aware of this particular story?
Yeah.
So we've got a number of MPs from the Conservative Party and from the Labour Party who have basically stepped away from their own parties. They're starting a new party called Independence. It's ironic that they're also Remainers. That's just ironic, and they want the people's vote. But these MPs who were voted, and I've said this is important, these MPs were voted in by the people to act out the will of the people, and they want to be independent from government and the will of the people while still holding office. Does that make sense? They're MPs who were voted in by the will of the people, to act out the will of the people, but they want independence from the government and the will of the people while still holding office. That for me is illegitimate. It's an illegitimate position. I don't agree with the will of the people. I don't agree with government who are trying to instrument the will of the people. So I want to set up a new independent party, but I'm not going to allow people to vote again on my position in my constituency. They're resisting that. Can you see how what's going on politically does filter down into our environment? And that's why you hear a lot in the news about uncertainty. Well, uncertainty because authorities are behaving a certain way, which makes everybody feel uncertain. Yeah? What do you think they should have done? Whether they disagree or not, what do you think they should have done? Stayed? Everyone agree with that? Absolutely. Now let's move on to the economic side of things. The Bank of England governor backtracks on Brexit. So this is Mark Carney, who's head of the Bank of England. He's constantly been the sort of warning of Brexit and the dangers of it to the economy. And now he seems to be saying, well, actually, no, it's quite good from a democratic standpoint, and UK might be okay financially. The little diagram I put there, by the way, was the day before and the day after we left. We officially said we wanted to leave. You see the huge drop. But can you see what's happened afterwards?
Came back up.
It's climbed. Yeah? So the decision for the people to leave EU has happened. That's the impact. Since then, we have climbed. But the way that you listen to the propaganda politically, it's as if we're going back to square one again. And it's going to what? Drop again. This is all, by the way, all this is part of this idea of what is it that you submit to that's valid, or what is suppression and is invalid. Does that make sense? Yeah, so now we're looking at a bit sociologically what's going on. In the workplace, if you look at this graph that I've provided here, it was a poll that was carried out by YouGov, and it was released in 2015. Nearly a third of people in the workplace, 29% have been bullied at work. Yeah? Women are 34% more likely to be victims of bullying than men. And the highest prevalence of workplace bullying is among 40 to 59-year-olds. I think that's quite striking in terms of where it happens. 34% are affected. In nearly 3/4, 72% of cases, the bullying is carried out by a manager. So that's that central pillar there, yeah? Central block. More than 1 in 3 people who report being bullied at work leave their job because of this. That's quite striking. You know, we talk about submission and suppression, yeah? People go into the work, they understand they're to submit, but they experience suppression. And that's quite challenging. Has anybody here ever experienced that in work? Yeah? So you know how much it impacts your job. You know how much it impacts how you feel and the work that you do. One of the latest things is even in the charity sector, which is often known to be, whilst it's a difficult space to work in because there's not always a lot of money, it was always known historically as a place where people got on and they're unified. But with the whole issue with Oxfam that came up a few years ago, suddenly we're seeing we're seeing that sector impacted as well. And basically in February, the charity was accused of covering up claims that staff sexually exploited female victims of the 2010 earthquake in Haiti. The commission has heard multiple staff raise concerns of elitism, racism and colonial behaviour, sexism, rigid hierarchies and patriarchy, it said. So this is another sector that we're seeing manifestations of suppression. Yeah? And then this one, which was more recent. In 2017, a school basically turned the blind eye to a teacher having an affair with a student. Okay? The case was in June 2017 where a 15-year-old ran away with her 30-year-old teacher. The case raised the question of whether grooming had taken place or not, and the teacher was imprisoned. Again, the improper relationships, yeah? It moved from this issue of right submission between a teacher and a student to suddenly it changed to something else. It became about a relationship that shouldn't have taken place. This one might be more familiar with people because it's still in the news and it's still going on, and that's the Rotherham child abuse. Everyone heard of that? It's the case where, from the report, there's revelations of at least, and this is at least, I want us to get this, at least 1,400 children were sexually exploited in Rotherham. And the report branded the local authority here, so this is, when we talk about authority, we're talking about police, we're talking about social services here, we're talking about local council, as not fit for purpose. And it was left facing a takeover by the government commission. Now, that's striking, because this is not the only area where that's taking place. All right? But 1,400, I mean, where did we get to that point? For us, when I was growing up, if you just heard a few cases, it was a problem. Now we're talking about 1,400, we're in the hundreds when we're talking about abuse. And again, we're seeing that as suppression. Yeah? Now, by the way, it's connected to other things about people in the system who were trying to fight against this happening, and they were suppressed from actually speaking out and saying the truth. I just put a graph there because I thought it was important. In terms of the NSPCC, it had a report called How Safe Is Our Children 2018, and it was recorded that over 13,000 offences in 2016 and 17, which is a rate of 12.9 offences per 10,000 children aged under 16. So this is about cruelty and neglect to children. All right. So just in that year, there were 13,500 recorded offences, which is about neglect. Then the next graph, one of the things I just wanted to pick up from that graph was that over the children that have been referred and assessed to the social services, you can see the largest was based on domestic violence. Can you all see that? I'm drawing out the fact that I think there's a problem in the hierarchy. Yeah? And it's at all levels. Okay? It's at all levels. It's been so bad that this year there's been a new domestic abuse bill. Alright? But campaigners say that that new domestic bill doesn't go far enough. Each year, nearly 2 million people in the UK suffer from some form of domestic abuse. So this is in the home. 1.3 million female victims, which is 8.2% of the population, and 600,000 male victims, which is 4% of the population. All right. What they had done with this new bill is they brought in a definition of domestic violence or domestic abuse to include economic abuse, controlling and manipulative abuse that isn't physical. Yeah? Whenever you see the government act in a certain way to pass a bill, you know there are problems. Now, we don't see all these things. We hear them on the news, but we don't see them because they don't enter necessarily into our sphere of life. But they're there. They're there and they're being experienced by many people. This one's most obvious. I don't even need to say anything. You should be able to guess what that picture's about. Anybody?
The Catholic.
The Catholic priests. That one's been going on for a long time. Who doesn't know about that? Okay? This one's more interesting. I'm getting closer to home because I'm talking about church here. Alright? The next one's even interesting. Alright? There was a pastor, I'm not going to mention names or detail, but this came out in the last few years. Which building do you think is his?
The one on the left.
Do you think so? And which building do you think is the church's?
Right.
The one on the right. So this pastor, he was hit with bankruptcy order of 60k tax debt. He hadn't paid his tax. And what happened was the church, actually, he had to pay 60 grand plus additional bills because he had to go to court, and the church paid for it. Alright? The church paid for it. And the thing about this, which is why it got into the news, was that the newspaper revealed how the church was based in one of the poorest neighbourhoods in Britain. Alright? And that church takes more than 1 million a year in donations from its worshippers. And the accounts show that the pastor receives £102,000 a year in rent for the church's headquarters, which is the one on the right. If I was the elder within the church, I would have said, if we're going to pay that bill, we're going to move the church into your mansion. That's what I would have done. Because clearly, one is being kept and the other one's not being kept. And it looks to me like a lot of siphoning of money, frankly, going on. You see, that for us, we go to churches like that on the right-hand side, but none of us think suppression. None of us think that, do we? Yeah? Because many of us don't know where the money's going. We're not asking where the money's going, even if we're regularly paying it. We're not asking. But it just so happens that he's head of the church, typically, because he's a pastor, and just so happens the church has said they're going to pay for it. Come on. Now, I don't know about you, but his debt is his personal responsibility. Yeah? It was his personal debt. Yeah? It was his personal debt. He had not been paying his taxes. Yeah? So the church paid for it, but who owns the house? He does. And the church building is a lease. They don't even own it. See? Again, submission and suppression there. How's that working? What's going on? You might know this gentleman. His name's Tommy Robinson. Generally well known. He's often called in the media as a far-right activist. He's often aligned to racism. There's no evidence of that. And he has, because he's outspoken about the grooming, I showed a picture about the grooming in Rotherham. He was from Luton, and he's very much outspoken about what was going on, and he'd been outspoken, he's an activist, been outspoken for years, before he even met Theresa May, and submitted all that was going on, and he was ignored, basically. And now, up to this point, he has just recently been censored from Facebook and Instagram. He did a brilliant video called Panodrama, where he was challenging the way that journalists gather information and report on it. And since that video went out, the response has been, he's been shut down.
Censored the next day.
He's been censored literally the next day. Suppression. So legal and technological means are being used to suppress free speech in this situation. You may have seen this recently, which is the street pastor in Southgate. He was preaching about the kingdom of God. He must have been in his 60s, I think. And he was basically, the police grabbed him as if he was in his 20s. That's basically what happened. I told him that he couldn't preach, and they deliberately took him like miles away. He had no money, They deliberately took him in that direction, not to help him at all, so he'd have to make his way back. The story around it is actually that he was preaching it there, and a gentleman came up to him. They don't know if the gentleman was Muslim or not, but began to accuse him of public disturbance. There was a woman videoing that said no, there had been no public disturbance. This man was simply just preaching. But the police didn't even, they just heard that there was disturbance, and they straight away took him. Now this is happening more and more. Okay? Again, there's a question mark on there. The police are there to serve the people. And we're supposed to submit to them in service to the people. However, when there's suppression, there's a challenge there.
Can I just add something?
Yeah, sure.
So I went to an event recently, and Pastor Ade said that from who heads up Christian Concern, actually they took this gentleman on as a case.
Yeah.
And he said a part of the problem is that a lot of preachers don't know their rights, and he's actually created a booklet, so you can find it on Christian Concern or get in contact with them, and they've actually done something so that people know their rights when on the street, and then they can tell the police the situation. But he also said it's about informing the police as well what they should and shouldn't be doing when they're out in the streets. So, yeah, it's about education.
It is about education, but the question is, even in the education, it's about the strength of the people to press it, and that's what's come out of this whole conversation. It's about other groups seem to have the strength to push back to the police. Why is it that Christians don't? And that again is a submission and suppression thing. So, what's the root cause of the problem? When we're seeing in the political, economic, sociological, legal, environmental. You know, one thing I didn't mention, that's not the only case, just for the gentleman preaching the gospel, there's also the issue to do pro-life people standing out and doing vigils outside of abortion clinics. And there's a whole issue around stopping them from doing that, even though they're not protesting. So when we're seeing all of these things within society, you may not be experiencing it, but would you agree with me that's a lot of suppression? Yeah? Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So it may not be on your doorstep, but the question is, when will it reach your doorstep? When will it come into your sphere? It may have come through family members. Okay? So, what's the root cause of the problem? Well, I think that one of the things that's important is to read Timothy chapter 3, 1-5. We probably know it if we've read it a few times ourselves, but it says this. It speaks about the nature of relationships, and it says, but understand this, and I want you to really pick up on this, because I think it's really important. It says, but understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty. In the last days there will come times of difficulty. Say that with me. In the last days there will come times of difficulty. And I want you to, if you do write it down, note it down, put that down. Difficulty. It's not telling you that it's only going to come for one person but not the other one. It says in the last days there will be times of difficulty. In other words, there will be challenges for everyone. Okay? And that's really important. I'm actually only referring to that whole text throughout this whole presentation. But it's something I want you to keep stuck in your mind. And then it begins to describe what the things that will cause that difficulty. Okay? It begins to describe them for us. It says, for people will be lovers of self. They will be lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness, but denying his power. Avoid such people. Interesting. It's telling us to avoid those things, all right? But it tells us there's going to be difficulty. It means we're going to face them. It means we're going to experience them. That makes sense? All right? Now, one thing I want to highlight here is this. I think one of the reasons, the beginning of all of this starts with lovers of themselves. then that sort of, it's like a seed that blossoms out into everything else. So the first thing that's going to happen is people will become lovers of themselves. Well, Instagram. Selfies. Yeah, it's a manifestation of that text. Alright? Now, the essence of it is this. Our relationships have changed, and I'm not just saying that as in recently. Our relationships have changed over many, many years, where they are more transactional and less relational. Do you understand that? Our relationships. If you look at the technology we use, its emphasis is on transaction. And the transaction is, what can I get, not necessarily what can I give. Okay? Now, how do I know that? Because who of us has got Instagram here? Yeah, you got Instagram? We're on Facebook maybe? Alright? We're on, I don't know, what, Twitter? Alright? Okay. Are you guys on anything? Facebook, okay, right.
WhatsApp.
Let me ask you a question. How many, in an hour, how many times, I'm going to go up on numbers and you can tell me how many times you look at your phone. So in an hour, do you look at your phone once an hour? Twice an hour? Put up your hand for twice an hour? 3 times an hour? 4 times an hour? Somebody's 5 times an hour? 6 times an hour?
We should count it in tens.
Wow, okay. Alright, okay. 10 times an hour. 20 times an hour. Alright. Basically, we're doing a lot more looking at our phones. Now, why are we looking at our phones? Well, it's not just to see what other people have posted, but we are looking for an incentive when we go on our phones. So in other words, if I post something, I want to see how many people have liked what I have posted. Who agrees with that? I want to see whether I've got a reaction. If I put a picture up, if I make a statement, who's liked it, who's loved it, who's not liked it. Is that not true?
Yeah.
Right? That's a problem. Because in that sphere, it's purely transactional. It's about what I am getting. And that's the issue about lovers of oneself. It's got nothing to do with giving, it's got all to do with getting. And now we're all about getting likes. We actually say to people, yeah, I've got 2,000 people, I've got 3,000 people on my Instagram. Yeah? And then we use this term, influencers. Yeah, like it's got weight. Alright? Okay? What scares me about all of this, in a very basic way, is that, and I'm just going to mention it here, we've become transactional rather than relational. We focus on what we can get rather than what we can give. We're more dependent on technology for interactions to incentivize us. You sit on the train, and where's everybody looking? They're looking down. So there's no longer interaction between humans, there's interaction through technology to people. So the technology has become the interactive point. You got that? We also live in echo chambers. Echo chambers are wanting to be around those people that agree with us. Yeah? Where I can hear the same thing that you're saying, you can hear the same thing that I'm saying. Slightly in a different way, but essentially the same thing. And then finally, the communities around us are communities of followers rather than friends. Followers rather than friends. In real life terms, how many real friends do you have? Really? That have carried on from school maybe, or college? Not that many? 1. Yeah. Some maybe have a few more. But some people, they're not close to the people they call friends. Because all their friends are on Facebook. or they're on Instagram. And they are followers. They're not friends. I always said to my son, I said, he's not on, I've not put him on social media, I won't allow him yet, he's not ready. But I always remind him, even at school, I said, look, your friends are friends that give you something without you asking. They're the people that see a need and fill a need. I said, always remember that. Because real friends are there when you need them, and are there to support you, and are not there to take from you. And you and I know we had friends at school like that. You had those friends that were with you for something, and you had those friends that were with you because they gave you something. Alright? And it's more difficult now because of the technology. So we've got to be a lot more aware of the fact that even I've seen it within ministry, I've seen this transactional element. Yeah? I engage with you to take you on a journey to buy a book. I remember I was in a meeting a while ago and I just met the person and the person had just met the people and they're already talking about the book. Yeah? Transactional. In other words, you're not there to engage with human beings and talk with them and chat with them and mesh with them. You're there to say, I've got to sell a book. So, hi, how are you doing? What's your name? Are you a Christian? Oh, brilliant, I've got a book for you. Transactional. That's part of the problem here. So, a couple of things we need to understand about authority and rank. Yeah? Is this interesting? Is it helpful? Okay. So, a couple of understandings. We will work within authority, we will work within rank, and I want to talk a little bit about that. So, submission or suppression manifests in a hierarchical relationship, where one person has authority over another. Traditionally, known as rank, there are a number of reasons why a person may have authority over another. So, the reason why somebody is over you, there's different reasons for it. It's not always a work context, okay? For example, you could have what's called an inherited position. So a person is an authority over you because they've inherited that role. It was a rank that's passed on through hereditary lines. So for example, the Queen. Yeah? The Queen's there simply because she's inherited that role from her legacy. The other type of position is a delegated position. That's where it's been appointed by an authority over you. So you might be in work and you've got a new line manager, but that's because it's been appointed by the person above. Yeah? And so that's that authority there. Then you've got what's called a qualified position. That's a position earned by knowledge and expertise. That nobody's appointed that person in your life, but you submit to them because they bring some expertise that you haven't got. Does that make sense? And then finally, there's the mature position. And that is a person who's simply recognized by their age and their maturity. So those are the 4 different types of rank that might exist in your sphere. The first is inherited position, very rare. That one's very rare. The second is delegated position, the most common one. The third is qualified position, and that's common as well. And then mature position. Now sometimes, our parents, for example, will take the mature position. Now they may not always be mature, but they take that position. Colleagues at work who line manager, which position they might take, more than likely be the qualified or maybe the delegated because they've been put in that position. So when we're thinking about rank, we have to think of it as inherited, delegated, qualified, or mature, in terms of the way these people interact with us. Sorry? No, I know, this is in my notes. But don't worry, I'll feed it. We're going to record, it's all recorded. So, when you're also thinking about authority and rank, it's important to think about, picture a building in your mind. Alright? And the reason why that's important is because in a building, you've got walls that are load-bearing. And a load-bearing wall is a wall that takes stress. Okay? Have you ever gone around your house and some walls, you can knock on them and there's an echo, and then other walls are solid, yeah? So the solid wall is the load-bearing wall. Okay? And it takes the weight. So when we think about authorities or hierarchy, it's because authorities are supposed to take the weight of responsibility and they're supposed to disseminate that evenly. And that's what a load-bearing wall does. It takes the weight off the roof and anything else and it spreads that load across the entire building. Does that make sense? So when we're thinking about it, we should think about authority in exactly the same way. Now, an authority is a person who holds an office, a rank, responsibilities, duties and privileges. And I want to really focus on this point. It makes them distinct, but they're not unique. Alright? So an authority makes them distinct, not unique. What we tend to do with authorities is we sometimes make them special. So you see like MPs, for example. There's an idea that, well, we think that MPs are experts in what they do, yeah? And so that they are professional at this, and you'll hear people on the street saying, when you're talking about politics, they say, oh, well, I don't really have an input, that's for the MPs to figure out. Yeah? Have you ever heard of white coat syndrome? Anybody?
Yeah.
What's that?
People that get really scared or nervous when they have to do the doctor.
Yeah, exactly. So so there is this apprehension, but there also on the reverse, there's a situation where we automatically submit to a person wearing a white coat. It's this idea they're an expert, they know what they're talking about. You know, if you were in a building and a person in a white coat came in and said you need to do X, Y, Z, you'd probably believe them because you saw the white coat. It's just this idea that they know what they're talking about automatically, yeah? So, why is that important is because distinction is necessary, but that does not mean they're special. It doesn't mean that they can't make mistakes. It doesn't mean that they can't get things wrong. What has made them distinct is not themselves, but it's the office they've been given. Does that make sense? Alright? Now, structures are also used throughout the Bible. So, for example, the word Pharaoh represents a house. It means house. And it wasn't something typically used in that time, and it can be used for house or column. When we talk about elders, yeah, the word elder is ascribed to a pillar, a structure that is load-bearing, where Jesus is known as the cornerstone of the faith. Cornerstone is in reference to a building. So there is rank in the kingdom just as much as there's rank everywhere else in the world, and they have a responsibility to bear things, carry things, and maintain things. This will make a little bit more sense as we move on. So, authorities tend to comprise of three things: power of will, residency, and dynasty. Power of will is the ability to get something done, okay? And one of the things I want to point out there is that when we talk about submission or suppression, power of will comes into it because suppression comes about when an authority is exercising their will in the wrong way. Did you get that? Yeah? So when an authority is exercising their will in the correct way, it draws on the requirement for submission. But when they're exercising it the wrong way, it becomes suppressive. Does that make sense? So you can imagine it like this. Imagine there's a pillar in this room and it's holding up weight, yeah? Now, it's doing its job effectively, but if it stops doing its job, what's going to happen to that weight? Where's it going to go?
Rest of the walls.
Sorry?
Rest of the walls.
It's going to go everywhere else. And what's going to happen to the rest of the walls?
It's strong enough. It's not strong enough, so you'll collapse.
They collapse. Yeah. That's how you need to think of your relationship in a hierarchy. Yeah? If the authority is exercising the power of will correctly, then what happens is everything else is able to carry its relevant responsibility. But if it's not, then you feel the pressure, suppression, around. Have you ever been in an atmosphere of work with a very poor manager and the whole atmosphere feels what? Suppressive. It's because he is exercising his will in the wrong way. And sometimes not at all. So it's putting a burden on everybody else. If you are a manager or a leader, this is useful for you to know. Because your job is to identify areas of your team, your environment you work in, you have responsibility over, and your job is to do what we call pressure tests. Where there is problems going on, your job is to make sure that it's not because of you and undue influence, and that that person is able to carry their own workload effectively. Make sense? So, there are about 4 different levels of authority in society, okay? Level 1 is family authorities, okay? Parents, grandparents, uncles and aunties. Level 2 is local authorities. So we're talking about elders, deacons, head teachers, police officers and civil servants. The third one is governmental authorities, judges, lords, members of parliament, and then finally national authorities. And that's monarchies, presidents and prime ministers. So you can see that when these authorities throughout the structure of rank are not doing their job, what happens below that?
Feel the impact.
Feel the impact.
Yeah.
It cascades down. That's why when we were talking earlier and saw like David Cameron did what he did, automatically it begins to have a rippling effect. Alright? So all rank is connected, and if rank is properly understood, it's an important part of a structure. But if it's not understood, it causes stresses in the entire system. There are 3 things that you need to understand which are important about rank and authority. Authorities have the capacity and the capability to rule through their spirit, their soul, or their body. Okay? That is, they can rule by logic and rationale, by sense and intuition, or by physical force. Authorities can choose a combination of these, or they can make decisions by default based on personal preferences. I want you to think about some people you reported. What job do you do, if you don't mind me asking? Brilliant. I've only got a scenario there for you. Do you know the methodologies, project manager? Prince 2, Agile? Yeah? Okay, cool. So that's even better. In my world. In my world. Personal preference. In my world already. Right? So, you can think of scenarios where you've got people above you, people below you. Yeah? And you can, depending on your decisions, because you're always having to make decisions at different points, depending on the information that's coming to you, you can decide either you're going to respond through logic, which is facts, data, figures, intuition, which is more about the relational element with people, yeah, or by force. It's called blunt force. Don't do it, it needs to be done now, deadline focus. Yeah? How many of us have experienced that? Okay? Now, the challenge you have is that some people that you are submitted to and who are authorities over you, they've only learned one way of doing things. So you can meet somebody who just only knows by force. Yeah? So everything you chat to them is like, it's got to be done now. Do it now. It's really physical. They don't engage with people. They don't engage in communications. They're not listening to people. I'm sure you're thinking of somebody now. In your head. Yeah? You guys, if you're thinking of me, we were going to have a conversation. Alright? I try not to be. But every one of us has a predisposition, yeah? Alright? I've been in conversations where there's one person within a team who is always in the intuitive realm. They live there. They love it. So every time there's a decision to be made, let's all get together. That it can be frustrating for a project. Yeah? Because it doesn't always need that. And then on the flip side, you can have somebody who doesn't want to talk with anybody and they just want to make the decisions by themselves. Okay, many of us in African homes, yes? Fathers, commonly what do? Make the decisions by themselves. They don't want to, they want to come out and say, this is what you're now going to do. Yeah, so they're by themselves. So now you're getting an idea of the issue of rank and authority and the challenges of it. Alright? Now there's another thing that I think is really useful. Authorities also choose the level of authority they give to others by delegating decision-making powers through the ranks of community or organisation. So, an authority can say, right, in their mind, now by the way, I'm not saying they've thought this out. I'm saying the way that people work is very organic. They will have decided by relationships with people how much they want to delegate to people in terms of additional authority to them. Alright? And there's three ways that they can do that. They can be an autocrat. And an autocrat is somebody who has absolute power and won't share it with anybody. Yeah? I've worked with people like that. Yeah? They will only give you, they won't give you power, they will give you work to do. But they won't ever give you power. And when we mean power, by the way, let me make it clear, it's the ability to make decisions. It's that ability to say yes or no to something. That's power. Alright? But they don't do that. They just constantly say to do this. They're task-oriented. Then there is the meritocratic. There's that person who says, I'll give decisions to people, the ability to make decisions, I'll empower them based on merit. Yeah? So if I'm working with yourself, Alina, okay, I will give you the capacity to make decisions in a project, but it's based on what I think, how skillful you are. Yeah? It's whether or not you have a certain understanding, you have a certain skill, you have a certain experience. And then finally there's the democratic person. I get annoyed by the Democrats, to be honest, the authority. That's where even they don't make decisions, there's always going to be a consensus. Yeah? So there won't be anybody leading from the helm, it's sitting at the back all the time going, okay, let's discuss. Even sometimes the basic things like, how are we going to open the door? Let's discuss it. Who's going to make a cup of tea? Let's discuss it. It just draws out the entire process. I'm sure we've engaged those people, yeah? So I've got a diagram for you up here. Okay, you guys can see it? Is this helpful?
Yeah.
Is it? Good. Okay, so I want you to, I'm trying to help you to understand authorities, and that will help you in terms of how we're going to relate with them in submission and suppression. Yeah, mister.
Are you going to talk about the, maybe you are thinking about it, but in the intersection, because there's like generally all, some who are working, you've got middle management and you've got their high management.
Yeah.
And depending on how their high management treats them.
Exactly. Yes.
And very few, when you met like a couple of managers, you take a lot, you never notice it until they go. When my manager left, I realised how much he took. You would never show the pressure he was under, the rubbish that you get. But then when new manager came, the first thing he said was like, you guys are not doing well. And I was so shocked, because we actually are doing really well. But because we were 1 or 2% below the KPI, you know, we're not doing well. And I was just, like, for the whole week, I was like, we're not doing well. What? Because I've never been spoken to like that.
So that is a very good manager, because a good manager over your team will also, they will protect the team from rubbish. Because remember that often you've got people higher up who are just cascading stuff down. They're task driven, transactional. They talk about, they use the organisational language about being relational, but they're not relational because of the way they behave. All right. I used to have somebody head of me who every time we met for our reviews, she would say, "How's things going?" And I knew that the question was not meaningful. She was not interested in knowing how I was doing. She would sit down together, how's things going? And I'm like, okay, we're going to have to do this again, aren't we? We're going to have to repeat this all the time. And you can see it in her eyes. She's already decided what she wants to do next, and that's what's important. But because of your performance review, you've got to ask the person, how are things going? She did not have any degree of intuition and engagement. And she used to just generally live in the office. And so she met you, how are you doing? Everything okay? Great. Right, here's the next list of things to do. Transaction. That's part of the problem. So the diagram you've got there is a diagram where I want you to see that the X's in that diagram are decisions being made, yeah? So when an authority is making decisions, they're going on the left-hand side thinking about logic. It's not logging, it's logic. Logic and rationale, their sense and intuition, physical force. And then on the bottom is whether they're autocratic, meritocratic and democratic. So they are moving either left or right or up or down. And their decision making is going to appear in any of those. So if they have a propensity, then you're going to always be confident about the way they're going to do it. But if they don't have a propensity, you're going to have your ears and eyes open. Yeah? In terms of the way that they're doing things. So I'm going to throw some questions out to you now. So we're going to get into a bit more activity, so you don't have to listen to me too much. About these things. So you've got that diagram in front of you. This is a group exercise. We'll get into it. So the next one is just a blank one, yeah? All right. Now, I'm going to give you a scenario. You are, and I'm trying to show you why everything's plausible. So listen to this. You are the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. All right? You've got status right now. I've just queenied you. All right? Okay, you're the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. A Russian submarine has parked off the coast of British shores. All right? And is violating international boundaries. Your nation is on national alert. So it's serious, yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay? On that table, plot where your decision will be. Think down the left-hand side, think down the right side. Where would your decision be? Your decision, not everyone else's.
My left at the bottom.
Your decision. Your decision.
So Russia.
Let's go around. Where's your decision? Tell me.
So it's in the top left, so it's rational / logic and autocratic.
Okay, alright. So it sits with you mainly making that decision. Okay. Yours?
I think middle top.
Middle top, okay. See, and yourself?
Physical force autocratic.
Physical force autocratic. Okay, who's physical force autocratic straight away?
I was then, but I thought it was Russia, so that's started nuclear war. So I realised I was being rational.
Okay,
so
alright. Have you got it on your phone? Okay, well, let's do catch. I was going to ask you. And yourself, what are we going to go with? Sense and intuition. Okay. And on the bottom, where are you going to go on the bottom? Because you'd have to move along. Autocratic. Sense and intuition, autocratic. Okay.
Rational.
Rational. And whereabouts on the bottom? Autocratic. Sorry?
To the left.
All right, autocratic. Okay, so you can see, guys, that there's a case, a situation can create a case where you need to be forceful. Yeah?
I think the wise option is the rational, but I'm not thinking like that. You can get out.
Okay, second scenario, you ready? All right, you are the pastor of a local church, and you feel that the Lord has told you, that you and the church, because the pastor often thinks you and the church, to buy the building. How will you go about implementing your decision? So you're the pastor, and the Lord has spoken to you divinely. You've heard him, yeah? To buy the church. Where would you sit on there?
Sense and intuition is not democratic.
Democratic, interesting. Is that with the elders?
Yes.
Okay. Very good, very good, very good, very good. There you go. What happens if they say no?
Send the vote.
Do you move to the to the fourth side?
A referendum.
Anybody else? Anybody
I
else?
think democratic logic.
Democratic logic.
Yeah,
Okay.
There's
Democratic
going to be
logic.
people that's intuitive.
Okay.
There'll be discerning, and so I can be the logical one.
Okay.
What the final decision is.
Elena?
I like what you said, democratic.
And logic. All right, Nadia. Any ideas, Nadia? Any?
I think I would go with sense, intuition. I'm a bit logic rational and then autocratic is a bit what I'm thinking.
Okay.
If I'm a pastor and it's been given to me, you guys should trust, it's a bit like a parent-child relationship.
Ah, so the
Trust
parent-child.
what I'm,
Okay.
I've got you guys.
So that's definitely assuming that they are fully submitted to you.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
assuming that we are.
Okay, interesting. All right, scenario 3. Scenario 3 is a bit more closer to home. Your spouse spends money needlessly. All right? In other words, they don't think when they're spending. They can't put budget control. You can't put ring fence. All right? Okay? If you know that term. The household struggles to make ends meet at the end of the month.
Because the person spending needlessly.
Because spending needlessly. What will you do? So where do you sit on the scale? You guys, which one is the one that's spending needlessly?
You got theoretical anymore.
Knowing Roger and Pam, I feel that Roger, you're probably the reckless one a little bit on the money side. All right, so where would you put yourself in that? You're the one that's got to make a decision because you're unhappy.
Even as the woman, yeah.
It doesn't matter. In that case, it doesn't matter. Your spouse spends recklessly. Where do you sit on the issue? Sorry?
Yeah.
Why? Always get it wrong. Why? Yes.
Because it's like based on the fact that this isn't their talent. So I'm gonna have to think up for myself to be like.
So your debate with them is going to be: I've got the skills, you haven't.
Yeah.
Then I'll be autocratic. Give me the money. That's what it sounds like.
Somebody gives you the money. It's you need to change your ways.
Okay. So I get you. Anybody else?
How does physical force manifest in this?
I mean, I wouldn't say my husband's reckless, but he's always like, I don't know where the money's gone, what happened? And I said, well,
You're on camera, buddy.
don't let me see this. We've done a budget plan, we've done everything.
Yeah.
So what I eventually said is, okay, this morning, we're going to the bank and we're going to do a joint account. And half of everything we've done, half of everything we earn into that account, I'll do the same. That way we can keep an eye on it. And he was like, at first he was like, half. Then I said, well, you're complaining. So I kind of used logic and rationale.
Okay.
Okay, well, if we do this and if
Yeah.
we do that. So eventually I was like, oh, that's a good idea. And then it kind of came across like it was his idea. And
That is, I respect that. That's very savvy.
oh, we have to
Very
do it.
savvy.
Let's get it done.
Now, by the way, that scenario is a constant issue between couples. Because there's always one of the couples who's a lot more adventurous. Because it's not coming out the fact of money, they're adventurous as a person. And that's where it's coming from. Yeah. Whilst the other one is always a little bit more reserved. Yeah. I was that. On my side, I'm the reserved one. Yeah. I'm always the one like, wait a minute, we need to count this up. Why are we spending this? What's the purpose of it? How is it going to benefit us? Okay, if it's an investment, when we're going to get the money back? P?
That's the spender right there.
Yeah. Alright?
This is the spender.
Let me tell you, I'm a reserve.
You're in reserve.
And that's her version of reserve.
Up until this point. Okay, so one more scenario. Okay, this one's an interesting. Well, no, too much. You're at the shops. Okay, you're at the shops, Stratford, wherever you sort of like to go shopping, and your 4-year-old son, he has seen his favourite toy shop, and he tries to pull you away from he tries to pull away from you to run across the road to the shop. What do you do?
Wait, he tries to run across the road.
He tries to run across the road. He's seen his shop. You're walking about. He's seen his shop. He tries to run across the road, and you're with him like that, and he pulls away. What do you do? Exactly. In other words, based on the scenario, there is a case sometimes where it's not democratic. There's no conversation about skill sets and experience. It's just straight up grab. Yeah, there is cases for that in life. Okay, so sometimes we live in a world, and it's a very liberal world, where we just don't want to be seen like that at all, or we don't want to be dictatorial. No, there's cases where you need to actually be autocratic and say, no, you're coming with me. Yeah, and I've seen that in business, where there's a decision to be made in business, and the person at the helm says, no, I've heard you all, you've listened to what you say, but we're going in that direction, and it works out for them. It just doesn't happen all the time. That's the thing. Last one. This is for, I don't know back there. You are a project manager, yeah, of a team who must deliver a project by a specific deadline. A member of the team is not happy with the quality of some of the work. What do you do? So you've got a deadline, yeah, you're close to it. Member of the team isn't happy with some of the quality assurance. You know that term already. Yeah? They come to you about it because you're the project manager. What do you do? Everybody's waiting for you on you.
Physical force.
I guess it'll be a mixture of democratic and autocratic. Only because it will be a matter of finding out why that individual feels like that quality of work, and then the final decision will rest on me, whether or not I feel right when they're having this deadline to get that quality.
Because typically, as you know, it doesn't matter if you hit deadline or not, your user, or whoever's the person who's supposed to be benefiting, they're going to criticise it anyway. So the issue is sometimes quality, if it's like digital, sometimes the quality is not a biggie because it's coding, not let's say functional use, and so you can sort the coding out afterwards. Alright? Now, obviously, it could be different kinds of projects. For example, if it's a building project and you're not happy with a wall, we're going to have to put that on hold. Yeah? Because that wall needs to be sorted out, especially if it's a load-bearing wall. Yeah? So that's important. Okay. Interesting, was that helpful? Mm-hmm. So, how do we manage the balance between submission and suppression? And it's because it's not easy, because it's not always clear, and the relationship is changing. Alright? Now, whether it's between a policeman, a citizen, a line manager, a member of staff, or a husband and a wife, there has usually been a process of compromise and capitulation which leads from submission to suppression. So I want you to keep that in mind. Compromise and capitulation. That's the challenge. The journey from submission through to suppression is somebody's giving, another person's what? Taking. And there are battle lines, and one person's losing all the time. The challenge is, it's not about winning and losing, but actually, sometimes you lose to win, but sometimes you lose and everybody loses out as a result. Does that make sense? So when I counsel people, especially in marital relationships, there's usually one that just feels like they're capitulating all the time. They're compromising all the time. and they're giving all the time, and that person's not changing, and they thought that if they give, that person will change. No, actually, you need to not give. You need to say, I'm going to stop giving because you need to change your behaviour, but I need to bring somebody objective in who's going to be able to say your behaviour needs to change. Yeah? Because I can't tell you. In a relationship where you get too familiar, it's very difficult sometimes to tell the other person you need to change. Because they're looking at you like, yeah, you've said that before. So you need somebody objective coming in, a higher authority, to weigh up the situation and give their verdict on the matter. That hopefully will provide some degree of request for submission to change. Does that make sense?
Is that normally between, would the woman be the one that is normally constantly
capitulating?
Yeah.
Yes, and the reason for that is this. In the context of the church, or in the context of how we define relationships, the man is the head of the house. Okay? But that understanding is that the head of the house is not a dictator. It's not supposed to be a dictator. It's supposed to be somebody who understands how to rule the house, but is not burdensome. And it's also understanding that the woman is government. And so there's a mutual respect of the man being in authority, the woman being in government. I mean, in an ideal house, and I've always said this and the ladies will love it, in an ideal house, the man should come to the wife and say, we'll agree a strategy, and then he hands her the money. Yeah? Because women are good at managing resource. They're good at making money stretch. I was saying that I was at a fellowship on Thursday teaching, and I said, before pound stretcher, my mum knew how to stretch pounds. Yeah? You didn't need a shop to tell us that. Alright? And that was my point. When men were very different. When we've got to spend money, it's purpose driven. We will throw everything into a purpose. Alright? It's the woman that tends to say, no, wait a minute, there's some other things you need to have in mind here. So I think that there is an understanding about how the family how offices in the home should run, and it starts with recognising the man's in authority, the woman's in government, and there's a political language between the two that actually is quite useful, if you get it. You know, what you demonstrated there when you were talking about yourself and your husband, usually I was hearing your politics going on in conversation. Yeah, and politics is a good thing. It's actually a good thing. It's not a bad thing for decision making. So, a couple of things about toxic relationships, and we're going to get into an exercise, yeah, where it's going to be pairing up. All right? A couple of things. In the home, some things to be aware of where there's a danger that you're going to go from submission into suppression. Okay. First thing is that passive-aggressive behaviour in the home. Okay. You know, when you say to somebody, "What's wrong?" and they say nothing, but their behaviour is obviously saying the opposite. Have we all done that?
Yeah.
I've done it. Yeah. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, it's passive aggressive. Yeah, it's of course I'm not fine. I should be owning up to the fact that I'm not fine, so we can discuss it. All right. Volatility. If in your relationship with that person, and this, like I said, could be a father as well, mother or brother, sister. If your relationship is volatile, it's going high, you're great, you're on the mountain together, you're running along, dancing in the fields, and then suddenly it's low and you're arguing and fighting. That volatility is not healthy for any relationship. Alright? So that's another thing that you need to pick up on. Undermining the spouse. I have seen both, not just in spoken word, in the way people speak to one another, but I've also seen in the way people treat one another, a spouse being undermined. Yeah? And that's something that also needs to be watched for as well. Behaviour is just as potent as words. Walking on eggshells. Worried about every action you take. Have you ever been, ladies, ever been with your sisters in conversation and they say, oh, you're talking about something, and they say, oh, they go quiet. Don't say that because maybe he's in the room. Yeah? Now sometimes that's just a bit of a joke, but other times it's actually because there's some issues. And the person is walking on eggshells around the other person. Yeah? You know what I do? When I get in from work, my son knows me really well, and I actually been very open with him. When I get from work, I need to, what's the word? De-stress, yeah? And I have my way of distressing. So we have an agreement, okay? And that agreement is, basically, he doesn't bother me for half an hour. I come in, he says hello, I say hello, we do a quick hug, and then I go and de-stress. Because I know that he wants to tell me loads of things. That's what Josh is like. Dad, this happened to school, that happened to school. And the fact is they're all legitimate because in his world they're real. In my world I'm like, what's wrong with that? Well, she said that, who cares? That said that. But in his world, these things need to be addressed. Alright? But we've got an agreement because when I used to come in before and he'd start to tell me, I'd be like, oh my word, there's something else now. And the kids just repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. And finally, I said, look, Josh, I have to be honest with you. I'm tired when I get in. I need half an hour. And then I'll be with you. He goes, are you sure? I said, yes. So what happens? As soon as I get my half an hour, I come downstairs, we sit at the table, we have dinner together, and he just tells me everything, and I'm cool with that. It's about making space and figuring out the logistics. Having to ask permission for everything. Yeah? If you're in an atmosphere, it can be at work. I've been in those atmospheres. When I started the job many years ago, like 8, 9 years ago, I started in a job in a charity. And my first day, I met with every single member of the team that I was going to lead. And every single one of them were like, I don't know why you're working here, she's terrible. By the end of the day, I was thinking, what have I done? What kind of job am I in? And what struck me the most was the head of fundraising. She was deputy head in the organisation. She said to me, she goes, I'd love working here, but the fact is, in my last job, I was running multi-million-pound, campaigns, whereas in this job, I can barely spend £1. In other words, there is this having to ask permission for everything, constantly, in detail. And that's not a way to live, it's not a good way, because it disempowers you. Yeah? Constant exhaustion every time you relate to that person. Who's had those? Yeah? Anytime, look, even in friends, yeah, as well as family. You know, we all have family members that even talking to them is just long. Oh man, okay, where do I start? As soon as you think that in your head, where do I start? You know it's going to be a long journey. Alright, with them. That's also one of the things that can be part of it. And then finally, isolation from family and friends. You don't know how many relationships I've counselled where one of the individuals has gradually been separated from their family progressively over a period of time. And they're literally living for that other person. And that other person is now controlling the environment. They're threatened if anybody else comes into that circle. Yeah? Can we all say that we've experienced some of that?
Yeah.
Yeah? In some way, shape or form? And those are signs of toxicity in the relationship.
The times that's a man. Sure. I'm just wondering, because that's
okay. So I tell you what, it's a good point, but I tell you what, one thing I think is really important to acknowledge at this point, when men grow up, a lot of men grow up and they don't know the difference between power and control. And the first time they experience power and control is when they're driving a car. Yeah? Because control is the steering, it's the stick, yeah, and it's the pedals. Yeah? But when they've been growing up, they've been thinking, yeah? Especially if you've been playing PlayStation. Alright? But suddenly they get in the car and all of a sudden they've got to wield this thing. And this thing moves and it's got a back on it as well. And it's slippery surfaces and everything else you've got to factor into it. So often we've not grown under a patriarchy that's prepared us about control and power. So by the time you get to a relationship, we're knocking you on the head. Do you see what I'm saying? But it's not deliberate, that's all we know. Yeah, it's that forcefulness. You remember on the diagram? It's living in that block down at the bottom of forcefully, or everything you mentioned about fathers, yeah? Everything is, I go and make a decision here, I come out, do this. Go back, it's that Moses principle, come out, do that, yeah? Go back in. That's the problem. You know, I've seen it demonstrated in churches where pastors, they don't come in and pray and fellowship or worship because they're getting the message from God. Yeah? And at the crescendo of the worship, he comes in, doesn't he? Yeah? Right? That gives you an idea of the type of leader he is, where he's leaning in his propensity. Alright.
So then, sorry, because she made the point that it's men in a relationship that does that. I always find that there are sometimes women are the ones that are like, no, I think women are easier to kind of bend. If a man constantly says, I don't like this, a woman is more likely to change that. But if it's the other way, where it is the man who is mostly providing these toxic kind of things, what does a woman, or how does that get solved?
So, at a very basic level, one of the biggest problems we have in our communities is that we don't have proper accountable structures in place. what I counsel people who are moving up towards marriage is I say to them, they have to have an elder who is also responsible for the marriage just as much as they are. Because in our faith, you don't own marriage. Marriage is something that you receive from God, and it's a blessing you carry on down the line. So if you are stewarding marriage, then you're accepting a third party involved to help guide the marriage. Now, you can't, if you're gonna have a man in authority over you, you've got to make sure he's under authority. You're crazy to marry somebody who's going to be authority over you and isn't under authority of anybody, who can't be told this or that. Because if he can't be told, you're the one that is going to struggle when he sends you off the cliff. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's also about the way that men and women look, what they look for in their spouse is also an issue. If you're looking for predominantly outward characteristics, then it's going to be a problem for you. If you're looking for inward characteristics where that person demonstrates service to family, service to community, they demonstrate submission, yeah, then it's going to be a healthy relationship for you. Josh and I we've been going through Jacob, and we've been looking at Leah and Rebecca, all right? And we laugh all the time because we're reading through it. Josh will always say, Dad, you always say there's lots of EastEnders in the Bible. There really is a lot of EastEnders in the Bible. And in the morning when we've been covering it, he's been looking at the way that Leah and Rebecca are manipulating the situation to get the outcome. Even when it comes down to mandrake, fruit or veg or whatever it is. And they're using it as a tool to try and get to access to Jacob. So there's a lot of toxicity in that situation and in that relationship that isn't being necessarily addressed, and there's a lot of suppression going on there as well. So yeah, you've got to have an external authority, somebody who's actually coming in and going, in this situation, you're both wrong, and this is the best way to deal with it. In this situation, no, you're wrong, and we need to change behaviour, and then you have to be willing to submit. It's the only way. You basically need one another. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, at work, some signs. Is you alright? At work, some signs at work of the dangers of suppressiveness coming through. Alright? And by the way, Esther made a really good point. When you've got management and senior management, you start to feel things coming through, but you don't realise it's not from your management, who might be really good, but it might be higher management.
Sometimes you get to the point, I don't get it, but sometimes you say top managers are emailing them because they just need things done. So they're emailing the people on the ground. That's how desperate some managers are getting.
I mean,
in their own hierarchy.
And that is a big problem, by the way. Good management won't do that. If I put somebody in place to deal with something, it's their responsibility. I'm not going to circumvent them because that undermines their authority.
Exactly.
And I experienced that as well. So, authority there's a couple of points here at work. When an authority does not create or support mechanisms for getting input into strategic direction of the organisation. Sorry, that's a long sentence. But basically, it's the idea that they're not asking you, or you're asking for your input into the direction of where the organisation is going. And they've not even put a mechanism for that in place. That's a sign there of a problem there. It means that you're out the loop of decision making. All right? An authority resists being questioned on strategic decision making. Have you ever been in a situation where you've asked somebody, why is this happening? And they just don't want to answer the question? There you go. An authority does not regularly take stock of staff well-being. The guy that just comes in, he's focused on the task, and then he's out again. Yeah? Have you done it or not? That's a flag there. I'm not saying that you're going to experience all of them, but if you're getting them repeatedly coming up, then you need to be aware of it. An authority does not delegate decision-making powers at all. That's a big flag. Yeah? If your manager is telling you that the senior manager doesn't delegate to him, you know there's a problem. All right? The authority micromanages your tasks. I've seen people that are way up there in the organisation structure, focusing on somebody down there and the 3 things they're doing. Why? It's horrible. Authority deprioritizes lessons learned. Yeah? They deprioritize the lessons learned. Project manager, lessons learned is probably the major thing that you need. And they never give enough time for it. Right, and the thing about lessons learned in project management is it encompasses how people feel about the work they're doing. So if I don't factor that in, and that's not important to me, then really the people aren't important to me. Would you agree? Authority requests that you do things outside of your given time and role. It's where your workload is increasing beyond your time and your position. Starting to do what other people should be doing, even him. Authority shows preference to team members who are yes men. How many of us have experienced that? Yeah? Adam's putting up his hand. Authority does not support second tier of leadership. Authority doesn't like constructive criticism. Authority does not want to be questioned publicly, even though they ask for feedback. I've been in those. Tell me what you think. And like, I'm not telling you what I think. I know what Bob said last week, and you know what you said to him. Yeah. Authority wants minimum disruption. Have you ever had that type of authority who says, "Look, I just want peace. I don't want any headache. In other words, I don't want to deal with any issues at all. I just want you to do the work."
What do you mean that authority does not support second tier leadership?
It's what you were saying. It's basically that they're not empowering management with decision-making abilities, and so they're disempowering them, and they've become just as much of a task-driven group as you are. Because you might be the delivery part, yeah, of the organisation, and management are pretty much just doing the delivery, or sometimes not doing anything, because they're disempowered. So, we're nearly there, and we're going to get to some exercises. Has this been okay? Helpful?
Yeah.
Cool. So, managing toxic relationships, a key thing to remember, and this is crucial if you are seeing a change in the relationship with authority and you're concerned about it, and that is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's important when dealing with a toxic relationship to identify the difference between the person and the office that they hold. Alright? It's important to know the difference between the person and the office that they hold. Alright? That is really important. Now, why is that important? Because the office upholds the entire infrastructure of the organisation. The person sits in the office. Many people don't understand that. Now, by the way, I'm talking about a family level, community level, work, public, I'm talking about all levels. Sometimes you can have an issue with a person in an office, and because you inappropriately deal with it, you are judged because you've attacked the organisation rather than address the person. Does that make sense? I've seen it in churches. A person gets legitimately frustrated with a leader, alright, but does not, well, two things. One, doesn't follow procedure because there usually isn't procedure, alright? But two, they get frustrated and they are seen as the rebel, yeah? The church defends itself organisationally, the person's left out in the cold, and that original person who caused the problem is never dealt with. Yeah? Because the office and the person have become merged. And you can't see the difference.
Isn't it the whole idea of church that people feel that gives them a legitimate right to exit, however they exit?
Yes. Yeah.
Without honouring
the office.
And officers, even people in there have not displayed good citizenship.
Good leadership.
Behaviour,
yeah. And that is precisely it. A couple of things to remember when we deal with person and office. On the person side, you've got to remember the person is always temporal. They're not always in that office. Second, they have flaws. They're human beings. They've got issues. They've got their EastEnders in their life. Third, they lack skill and experience. You can't assume that a person who's ranked above you is always more experienced than you. It's just not always the case. And fourth, they can be immature. There's many cases in Scripture of people taking office and they're immature. And the Bible actually warns of that. The Bible says, don't put an immature person into an office. The office is static. It's a load-bearing wall. It's structural. You put the person in there, the person's immature, and if you get it mixed up, you'll end up attacking the wall rather than addressing the person. The office is more permanent because it's part of the organisation and its structure. It's a load-bearing role, and it has authority and resource, and then the other thing about that position is it impacts others. because it's part of the structure. Cool? So with that in mind, I want you to go through some scenarios, all right? I need to put you in pairs. 13. So what I'm going to do is I will just do the usual. I'll count through and then I'll ask you guys to gather together. Okay? Okay. Has everybody got into their groups? So this is all twos. Yeah. This is all one. This is all three. This is all four. Okay. So in the presentation. Sorry guys, very quickly. So in the presentation, I've given you a scenario. So scenario 1 is for all the ones. Scenario 2 for all the twos. Scenario 3 for all the threes. Scenario 4 for all the fours. Got it? What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to discuss the scenario as a group. I want you guys, I want you to think about. Everyone listening? Group 1 isn't. Thank you. What I want you to think about is 2 things when you're discussing this scenario. 1, I want you to think about when we talked about the issue of logic, intuition, and force. Do you remember that grid? Yeah. So I want you to think about that. And then 2, I want you to think about office and the person in the office. Yeah. So those are the things you're thinking about when you're discussing your scenario. You're going to have. What time are we supposed to? What's the time now? 8:17. Oh, we're good for time. So I'll give. Sorry.
8:30.
Okay, so we have to definitely finish at 8:30.
No, but
Okay, so I'll tell you because I want to give. How long do we need? So should we say about 15 minutes? Does that sound about right to talk about it? Yeah. Okay.
How long?
Actually, 10 minutes to discuss the scenario. Yeah. And I want one of you guys is going to be a spokesman. So choose your spokesman. Discuss the scenario. Think about what we've covered, and then you're going to give your answers back at the end. All right? Cool. Okay, off you go. Okay. I'm not going to go in a particular order, so I'm going to start over here. All right. So who's reading out the scenario?
It's a joint effort. Democratic.
No, I'm just recording.
Okay, so if you can read out your scenario, please.
You love your father, but of late he has become insular and doesn't talk much with you or your mother. One evening you arrive home to hear from your mother that they have argued. Your father has thrown your mother to the floor. You get angry, but your mother...
Sorry guys, we need to hear the scenario.
Your mother says, this is the first time it has happened and it will never happen again. Your father is under a lot of stress from work and it will resolve itself in the wash. What do you do?
So, the scenario is Dad has been getting quieter and more insular. Mum and Dad have had an argument. You've got back from work and Dad has hit Mum. Mum is saying, don't worry. It's because he's under great stress right now. What do you do? So guys, what was your...
Okay, well to start with, we said that it's tricky because you've definitely got to look at the office. You've got to look at the office and then you've got to look at the person. And so if you're looking at the office as a child, you've got to honour your father and your mother. So you've got to honour your father even though he's done it to your mum. So you're dealing with that
tension.
Yeah, that tension within yourself. Like, okay, I've got to honour my father, this is his office, but the person has messed up. The person in the office has messed up. So, so we said, even though it's hard, we've got to maintain that honouring of his office. And then in light of the grid, what did we say about the grid? What we decided.
Yeah, meritocratic. Because we said the mum had said it's the first time he's done something like that.
Okay.
And he's been going through a lot of stuff at work. So it's definitely taking it out of that context of it being a meritocratic.
Right. And we also mentioned about escalating the issue. And we thought that, okay, if they're in an ideal situation, if there was a family member
that our father was close to or was kind of under submission under. For example, a brother, sibling, or even their mother and father, would we speak to them about it, maybe escalate it and speak to them about the issue and say, you know, this is what's happened in the home, and we had that conversation. But then we thought, actually, our mother is our head, and so before going to speak to anyone, we'd want to speak to our mother, and she needs to do that. She was the one that needs to take that on, and yeah, make that call, whether she decides to escalate it or not. But as the child, you know, it's difficult because we're impacted, but actually it's the mother and father that are more impacted, so she's the one that's got to make the decision. And I think we also spoke about how does our behaviour towards our father, how is that now impacted by this, especially if we decide to just leave the decision making in the hands of our mother. And I think we said, what did we say? Yeah.
So I think you mentioned, actually I'll go with what I mentioned first. I think I remember that first. So I said the child would, I think how that would play out with reactions and how the child will then respond to authority and office in that house would probably be a bit negative.
Yeah.
So immediately you'll probably see the child probably being a bit rebellious towards that person, because obviously understanding the person is done wrong and hasn't necessarily come forward and said, okay, you know what, transparency, hold my hands up.
Yeah.
I failed in this respect as a human, you know, and then try and maintain office. Sometimes it plays out where they've messed up, not been transparent and owned up, and then tried to maintain office. And then you're sitting there as a child and you're saying, well, hold on a minute, the office is messed up. I don't want to respect this. Can't be part of the structure. And then immediately you start seeing that rebellious side. And then not wanting to listen to that person and instructions and rules. And then you
talking about how you know, make it quite clear that I'm aware of what happened and not try and tread on eggshells around the father, because just to be once again transparent and just aware that this, I know this is happening, just take it from there really. So they could be really negative or positive about me knowing, but I'd much rather present.
It's better than that. I think one of the problems with this scenario especially is that if the mother is not actively pursuing a way of getting resolution on this, it then sits there in the atmosphere of the household. And this happens constantly in homes, where there's things that parents say, something's happened, whether it's something light or something serious, and they say, oh, we'll deal with it later, it's not to be dealt with now, and then it just sits there forever. And then it, like I said, it trickles down into the feelings and the emotions and the angers of people that then goes into subliminal status and then appears in their adulthood later on. So there's plenty of things that have happened in the past that haven't been resolved, that haven't got a line drawn on them or under them, and they come up again later on in different ways, shapes and forms. So it's a difficult one, but the key one is about trying to... We also talked about, because family breakdown is the way that it is at the moment, you've not got those natural structures in place to escalate things. So to his brother or his mother and father, do you know what I mean? In which stuff can be aired properly in eldership and addressed properly in eldership. If they're part of a community, church, you should be able to have the freedom to go to another elder within the church and raise it. Yeah?
Even though we said that we'd want to do it through the mother, so we feel like it's the mother's responsibility in a sense?
Depends on your age. I think if you are old enough, you might have to say to your mum, if you're not going to deal with this within a particular time, I'm going to have to escalate it, because you're old enough to do that. Emotionally, yeah. So if you're like 13, 10, that's difficult for you, yeah? And that's where you might have to go through family first. But if you're 16, 17, you can press upon your parents. They need to make a decision on this, otherwise you're going to escalate it. And they might think you're wrong, but you're being right because you're honouring the office, even though they're being immature within the office. It's an interesting dynamic. Okay, over to this team.
You are a deacon within the church and you've been working closely with the pastoral team for many years.
The church is passed by a husband and wife.
Sorry guys, we need some voice there.
Yeah.
You need to move.
Sorry.
You need to move. You need to move.
Yeah, the church is passed by a husband and wife team. One evening, you hear an argument between the husband and wife. It is very heated, and the husband leaves the office and tells you he's going home.
After he leaves, you enter the office to see his wife sitting in tears. One side of her face is red, and she confides in you that there's been a domestic abuse in the home for many years. What do you do?
Okay, so what we discussed is how we address fatal office.
Did you guys get that scenario?
Yeah. So we said obviously the first thing would be to make sure that the wife is okay, and we sure console her. You know, obviously ask her what she would like to do. We have to have in mind that the ethical dilemma could be potentially something, is this a police matter, or do you see what you tell me? And that would be ethical dilemma. We did acknowledge that depending on the person, one teacher may feel, no, this is a police matter, another person is an actually, they're still trying to deal with it internally. But if we take it that we're dealing with it internally, but still having that ethical dilemma in mind, we agreed that we'll be going through the both meritocratic sense and intuition, but democratic and logical and rational. So what we try to do, as the Bible says, if we've got an awkward brother, and we have awkward brother because we've seen our elder, our pastor, hit his wife, or we witnessed it after, we will try to contact the person, most likely by phone. It's likely that the person will be uncontactable, won't pick up, so we will say, okay, we have to try and call a meeting today, as soon as possible, emergency meeting with the eldership and speak to them. Hopefully this is the first time, but that they don't know it, but if they do know it, that could also be another concern. But the point would be, what do we do right now? How do we address him in his office? And then we may decide to address him as a person. Maybe we do go through the police matter, but how do we address him in his office? Because technically the pastor is likely to be preaching the following Sunday. That could be tomorrow, it could be in a few days. And how do you sit there knowing that he's just done this? So how do you deal with this in that matter? So we're thinking organisationally, we'll have to call a meeting with the elders, and hopefully that will help us make a decision with the elders. Individually with the person and directly more to the wife, is it safe for her to go back? These are the questions we're asking them. Is there children involved?
We chose the meritocratic sense intuition, which is talking to the woman logically and with intuition and sort of persuade her to seek for further help, and that's dealing with the person and acting immediately.
I was in a situation where I was counselling a couple where the husband had been abusive. It's very difficult because on one side the wife had to come to a realisation that she was being abused and accept victimhood, which is difficult, that's a journey. On the other side, he's got to come to accept that he's not representing Christ at all and he's being abusive. And then they've got to accept from that getting help. Not easy, because it's pride. There's pride and there's a lot of arrogance. And then there is this, I won't get help unless you get help, which comes into it as well. And then there's the lack of pastoral input or lack of eldership as well. So this is a real difficult one, but it goes on. And I was saying, you hear about it in the news. When you hear about a pastor who suddenly is caught for something's happened, he's been caught for it. And I'm always thinking, well, the elders must have always known about this. This doesn't come to the public sphere unless it's already been happening in some way, shape or form. There's no way you could have hidden it for that long.
But then this is the thing, it's what you said, that the detention is that as technically the ecclesia is a defined authority on earth, but because of over centuries of being unable to deal with situations correctly in the spirit of God, one we've given authority to the state, fair enough, but we're not even able to handle things. When we do handle it, it just looks like a cover-up.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah. You could actually be trying to handle it right, but when it does come out in the wash, you're just going to be seen as a cover-up. Yeah. And it's because we don't have effective structures in place to deal with domestic violence, to deal with sexual abuse, to deal with these things. So it does become a police matter, but when we try to do it internally, and it could be for good reason, not because we're trying to hide it, you really want to help the person. If it continues, and it normally does continue, it just seems that we've covered it up, and we actually haven't healthily dealt with the situation.
Yeah. I think there is a case where if it's a repeated action, you have to know where the lines of the ecclesia finish in its jurisdiction and where it has to give it over to the state to address it. Because there's those lines, especially when it comes down to children these days. So you're absolutely right. Any other thoughts on that before we move on? Tough one? Anyone else experienced that before?
Yeah, I mean, there's a marriage at stake there.
Yeah.
So once you bring in any external party, like external in the sense like the police and whatnot, you have to calculate the cost. Definitely.
Because they could completely undermine the infrastructure of the authority, the rank there.
Yeah, because police don't care about it.
And they don't think of that.
Their aim is not to preserve the relationship.
Yeah. It's straight away to separate and try to protect. Absolutely. Now, next one, you guys. Work related.
At work, you have been working for high clients limited for over 2 years. A new manager has joined and the team already feel the impact. One day you notice that your colleague isn't very happy. He tells you that the new manager has been making inappropriate sexual remarks. Finally, yesterday she squeezed past him and improperly touched him. He doesn't know what to do as he doesn't want to lose her job.
His job.
Her job.
His job.
Oh, his job.
It's typo.
Sorry.
It's a typo.
How would you go about helping him?
So this guy's in a really difficult situation. His boss is speaking inappropriate to him, and then finally his boss does something physical, and he's talking to you. It's like,
so he's the guy, and
he's experiencing suppression from the woman.
Okay, and so the woman is touching him.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's spoken to him inappropriately. Now she's touched him inappropriately.
I see.
All right. Okay. So what did you guys come up with? I've got to cut you down to like 2 minutes because I've got to move on to the last team because of time. So what did you?
Okay. So we said that we felt that we would encourage him to go and speak to her because, as you pointed out, it's been a prolonged amount of time that she's made these remarks. But the reality is that he's never addressed it. He hasn't approached it. So we think that to protect her office, then we would ask to come and speak to her one-on-one and try and deal with it. If in that sense that it doesn't happen, then unfortunately we'd have to escalate it. We also said that it would come under sense and intuition and democratic because we would be communicating with him and getting him to actually communicate with her. It's a joint decision and we're sensitive and empathetic to the situation and what's going on. Yeah, I think that's right. Did you want to add anything? Yeah, and the other thing also was what's the other thing? What the office and the thing you mentioned that.
Office and the person.
Yeah. So I think in our actions we're trying to address the person and trying to see them as a human being. And one of the things that I think we came out in our discussion was that if we're not taking lightly that they shouldn't know, they should know what to do, but at the same time, we're not going to stand by that. We're going to try to actually deal with the person and try to deal with it in that manner and talk to them first, because otherwise I think if you try to not go around that way, then you could destroy the office and it could become
problematic. You mentioned something I thought was important when we came over. You talked about getting HR involved. Now, I think it's really important, but it's unfortunate, we also discussed this, that HR are supposed to be quite strong in their ability to come alongside and address issues, but often they're quite weak. And we have this, I've experienced this in like sometimes unions. You might have a union within your organisation, but they are quite weak. They don't seem to have any sense of, drawing a line and helping and supporting. They're there as more of an independent arbitrator and less somebody who says, no, this person's been wronged and we need some resolution. So that's the challenge, isn't it? That if I'm going to go in and speak, I am definitely going to go and speak to that individual and say this is inappropriate. But then if I receive a backlash and a poor culture from her, in terms of her management, she starts to treat me worse, I need to be able to know that I can bring in the HR who's going to give me some strength. And whether they bring me strength or not is another thing. But yeah, key one. I've got the time. You told me time.
Yeah, it's true.
Right, so over to this thing.
Okay. So scenario 3, with the family. You have just married your childhood sweetheart. You know the family for years and love attending the bi-monthly family gatherings. On one occasion, you happen to see some unusual behaviour from an uncle with a nephew. He is the life and soul of the party, and so you're surprised when you see him touch his nephew inappropriately. You raise this with your wife, who disregards it and says, everyone knows uncle can be creepy sometimes. What do you do?
So you're essentially a new member of the family because you've been married. You've known them for a long time, but you've never seen that detail before. And now you're regularly attending their bi-monthly family fest, whatever you want to call it. Uncle so-and-so is acting a certain way, and you're thinking that's inappropriate, and your wife is just brushing it off and saying, well, he's always like that, he's a little bit dicey, a little bit creepy anyway. So,
the life of the party.
What do you do?
We, all three of us kind of had different points that we kind of, because it was a bit like...
Somebody a bit forceful, roll up the sleeves.
Yeah, say your one first.
But
Right.
what, just quickly, what in terms of this scenario, we kind of, what we said in terms of the office and the individual, it was a kind of thing where it's like, it's uncle. And not only just uncle, not the quiet uncle in the corner,
Yeah, it's the
uncle.
That's why
like everyone knows him.
Yeah.
He's, you know, no one's really gonna look sideways if it happens because it's the uncle. I said, after addressing it with the partner, if the partner's just brushed it aside, I would actually go to that child and say, look, I saw this happen, and has it happened before? You and uncle, what's gone on? And bear in mind the age of the child. Has this happened before? What's gone on?
I'm thinking 5, 6.
Okay.
In that scenario.
So I think I would still,
you should have, because we were trying to.
Yeah, I would still say, look, I've noticed that, and you know, me personally, these are private, depending on what the inappropriate. But you know, when we say inappropriate, it's inappropriate.
Well, that was another point. We said that inappropriate is cultural.
Exactly.
What's inappropriate in one culture is different in another.
Exactly. So
Everyone there is part of the same culture.
yeah, exactly.
Except for him.
Also, you might be
he's
Nigerian
the one that
in
married
the UK.
into the family.
He's married into the family, so he's not in the same culture.
Which is why I would tell the child that, look, I don't think it's right, and if it was me, this is what I'll do, which would then, I would then advise the child to talk to a parent. I would then, that's where I ended it. I would talk to that child, tell the child to talk to the parent, and then probably follow it up.
So you're free from obligation after that
I
point.
think I've said it to the child,
I'm just
I've let
asking.
the child know that it's not right. This is not right.
This is my professional style.
Yeah, I think it is my professional side.
I see.
This is how I would address it. Talk to your parent, right? Or I will, and then we kind of sort it out from there. Because obviously no parent's gonna hear that, and depending on the uncle as well. That's another thing.
So what was the other suggestion?
He said to just keep hammering at the partner that look, this is not right. And
we came from the democratic side.
I think both of them agreed that they to keep talking to the partner and then both of them will address it with a family member that you felt comfortable with, like an uncle that you had that bond with, that you know you realised that you know could
We felt it was a sensitive matter, and also we just got married, so that puts us in a kind of vulnerable situation as well. There's all kinds of dynamics at play, but we are like, if there is another uncle that we know, or grandparent or somebody, we'll probably go to them first and then find out what the scope is. Either way, we were trying to do it together. Sorry?
You're worried about rocking the boat.
Definitely.
But then that's what everyone's worried about. That's why no one's said anything.
No, you should be very worried about rocking the boat. You should be very worried.
I wouldn't deal with that. As personal, because of personal experience and what I know, I don't know if I'm social worker too. I think that's long. I think you're putting the child at risk. I think
No.
It's a different.
You're putting the family at risk to go straight to the child, boom, and mess with that uncle.
Okay, I will talk to the child.
Are you okay?
But also, this was like, we didn't know exactly what happened.
And then if the parents don't
To
do
the
nothing,
child.
they will show. I will notify social services. That's me.
Definitely,
That's what I would do.
safeguarding, that's an issue.
Okay, so
before I get to that point, because that point there, now we're talking about breaking a family.
Breaking up a family structure.
I would not go there.
I think
there are other things at stake.
Deal with it within the family and think about how we can.
I definitely want to avoid social.
Can I tell you something? How many of us know about people who have gone through these situations and their families try to deal with it, and they dealt with it so inappropriately? Like their abuse continued.
And this is, and I think, to bring it back, I think across all of these examples, the whole point was I wanted to highlight something, and that is, if you are not actively addressing suppression in other people's lives, you often won't address it in yours when it comes up. If you are proactive about, in your community, in your family community, about protecting that community and seeing the bigger picture. I mean, the guys know, for me, year on year, there's something I'm wrestling with in some of these affairs. Counselling, guiding, and that is not the role of a pastor. That's not the role of a pastor. Exactly. That is the role of the whole body. Do you see what I'm saying? Remember in Ephesians it says that the offices, the apostolic, the prophetic, the pastoral, the evangelistic, etc., they're there to empower the body to do the work. And this is work. Dealing with our lives which are broken, which have got loads of EastEnders in it, and making it shipshape, and putting God's sovereignty into it. So the point of this is, you guys are looking and saying, man, that's a difficult one to grasp. Yeah, but that's definitely going to come up in your life. It may not be your household, but it'll be, if you're in a community, it's going to be in the midst of it. It's going to be, I remember I said at the beginning of the text in Timothy, difficult times. That's what this is. That's what we were just going through. Difficult times. They're not going to grow less. They're going to grow more. So it's a shame that we're not going for something to eat afterwards, because we could continue this conversation along there. But we need to close there. There is one more scenario. You've got the presentation. I'd like to take with you personally and think about. All right. It's scenario 5. Okay. Could you mind standing so we can pray? I hope you got something from today's session. I hope a lot of the stuff you've learnt about authority and rank can help in your own lives and also about being more proactive, addressing that suppression when you see it in the affairs of other people. Because God does expect us to do that. He expects us to be involved and hands-on. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks and praise this evening as we've gathered in your name to discuss matters of your sovereignty, matters of your dominion, matters which are about not allowing sin to have mastery over us and our community, but rather being proactive to address sin in a very, very practical way. In the midst of that, nonetheless, not destroying the rank and the authority and the order that you've put in place, but seeing that people who are with very weak frames often make a lot of mistakes in those structures. So we don't want to be a people that destroys those structures. We want to be a people that manages the people within them and make sure that your dominion is consistent from generation to generation. We thank you for the time and the counsel that we've learned from one another, and we pray it continues throughout our affairs. In Jesus' name. In the last slide on there is just so you know, we meet here every Sunday from 2 to 4. The hub, that's what we call it. So feel free to come along and engage with us. Otherwise, have a great evening. Thank you very much.